done a few articles in book chapters, usually co-authored with some colleagues of mine. I've enjoyed doing some reviews of dissertations as external referees. That's been fun. A few reviews of articles. The difference is I can choose what I want. And so I've been get better at saying no, and I get into doing articles and reviews and refereeing when I'm interested in the subject area. And that's been a nice change for me. And while it's been a while since I've retired, it's nice to be in front of an audience again. As Ariel said, much of my scholarly writing and work has been in the area of spirituality and ecology. And when I started to look into those areas, they were outliers. They were on the fringes of social work practice. I think way back and prior to the 1990s, Hugh Druin had a chapter in one of Frank Turner's edited books, and there wasn't much more after that, even though religion has roots for social work practice. In North America and in Canada, it was not a main part of our belief system. And ecology, perhaps even less so, which I'll talk about as we go on. And they're not, even with all the changes and development of literature, they're still not fully welcomed into the profession. And what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about why and what we can do about that. And I want to do a little bit of history. I should go 1, 2. I'm in the personal comment section. In my first sabbatical, around 1990, from St. Thomas, I was off at University of Toronto. Sorry, I like Boise. I was a visiting scholar, but I wanted to do some courses in adult education. And so that's where I went. And my department asked me to prepare a course, an upper level policy course for our BSW students. So I started on that process. And in the course of discovering that and putting that together, there were 3 things came to my attention. One was, from a policy angle, the work of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, at that time GATT, but now the World Trade Organization, and the impact those financial policies, economic policies of those world-level organizations were having on the people of the world. And it was pretty disastrous. They were a prime mover in my mind of all this neoliberalism. I can remember in my course having an image of Bram Mulroney as a robot-like person with the IMF and the World Bank monitoring the joystick as he walks away with his economic orders for Canada. But that was one piece of that. Another one was, which was a surprise for me, was when I walked into the large foyer at the bottom of Boise, Ontario Institute for Studies in Education in Toronto. I was overwhelmed. I really was struck by the number of magazines, journal articles, flyers, dealing with yoga, meditation instruction, personal development courses, human development courses, make yourself a better this through meditation. And it blew me. I was really amazed by this because it was jumping out from all different sources. And there was a lot of growing interest in the whole area of spirituality and mindfulness as we know it now today. And it was just emerging, and there were lots of small organizations, small groups coming, and that's at the same time when the institutional churches were on their decline in importance in people's lives. And the second finding in that period of time for me was what Lester Brown called the fastest growing social movement on the planet. And that was around environmentalism. Because at the time, in 90, there were a lot of issues around nuclear energy, around pollution. Clinton had a superfund beginning in the US. There was species loss. Scientists were beginning to report a lot of the real damage that now is, if you even look at the radios and newspapers, it's common. And so that started me on working into those 2 areas. When I came back, I started working with my colleague at the time, Brian Ouellette, who at the time taught the only course on spirituality and social work in Canada. Everybody remembers Brian quite fondly. And then I started, interest in spirituality got carried away when I started to help Brian do an evaluation of his course he taught. Then we went down to the States, to the Association for the Spirituality and Social Work in the US, and we presented this paper on the impact of his course And then I got to meet folks like Ed Canada and Fred Bestor and other guys who were very much into beginning to write about spirituality. So that strengthened that. And it wasn't a few years later that I met other folks who in Canada were interested in spirituality. And that led us to, in the year 2000, my whole department rented 2 vans and off we went to Montreal because there was the joint meeting of the International Association of Social Workers and the International Federation of Social Workers were having their joint meeting in Toronto. And at that time, John Graham was there, Bart Schwarzenegger was from Waterloo at the time. Myself and Brian, we formed the Society for Spirituality and Social Work. And that was in 2000. Then we had annual conferences each year. And then after 2006, we went into having annual conferences once here and once in the U.S. And that brought a lot of literature. I think probably 7 or 8 journal issues around spirituality, a couple around ecology and social work. But it started to be, our goal was to bring spirituality and ecology into the mainstream of Canadian scholarship. I think we did a pretty good job of that. But the other challenge of that was difficult because if you're in that doing work in ecology and spirituality and there's nothing in the social work literature dealing with that, you're reading outside the discipline. And I think even today, most people who are into those areas have a lot of reading outside the discipline. And I think that has some benefits to that, but you're at a bit of a loss because you're on your own. The real crux came for me in 1998 when I had this new knowledge and I was reading about the environmental crisis. And so I had this paper called Environmental Crisis Implications for Social Work. Eventually I got that published in a Journal of Progressive Human Services 7 years later. But at that time, it was a presentation. So up to Carleton University we met, and all the international social work teachers, CASSW conferences. So I got ready, showed up, nobody came. So I was at this national conference, all hot and bothered to talk about something that I was very passionate about. And there wasn't a soul in the room. And I think that spoke volumes about what the profession thought about the relevance of environmental issues for social. Even that in my socializing with colleagues after, what the hell does pollution, climate change, got to do with social work? And so that was a reflection of the status that social work had at the time. So if I take a little bit, talk about a little bit about social work and the environment, most of us are familiar with the ecological approach. Emerged in seriousness in the 80s, but it followed the work of systems theorists, Pinkerton and a few others who came in the 70s. And it became full-blown in the 80s with Jimmy Gitterman and Karen Meyer and others talking about applying a systems model with an ecological metaphor to social work. And there was lots of literature. I got several, probably a couple dozen articles and books that all address that issue. And by the year 2000, they were starting to do comparisons and move on from there. But that was a big step. And they used an ecological metaphor to talk about the relationships of people to all the realities in their social environment. And one of the benefits of that ecological model and systems theory allowed social work to merge the individual with the community with the policy level. And that's a real positive contribution of that systems type of thinking. Okay, and you used to have levels of practice, individual level of practice, community level of practice, policy level of practice, and they were different. And because of systems thinking and ecological thinking, we now have schools of social work. I think Toronto, for one, offers a field of study in a particular area. And you do all of those. You do practice issues, you do community issues, you do policy issues within the same area of practice. So it made social work much more able to really move forward in a much stronger interventions and more stronger connections. But the danger was, it was still only a metaphor. And it didn't deal with the physical environment. It mentioned them, but it didn't actually deal. Most text gave lip service to the physical environment, but it never really addressed it in practice. I can think of that. There's one book comes out in my mind. It was mentioned in the preface of the book with some earnestness, and it never appeared again in the rest of the book. Even in the outline of this rather large strategy table around impacts and interventions that people could do, physical environment was not there. I think the book got reviewed, and somebody in the reviewer said, you got to pay attention to physical environment, so they put a sentence in the preface, and it went from there. So the question is, that ambivalence about dealing with the environment and so forth came from, I think, our anthropocentric kind of roots, our dualistic roots about people and nature being separate. And I have studied a lot on paradigms, and there's a fellow named Barker who has a beautiful video, quite dated now. He called the video The Business of Paradigms. But he made reference to something called the paradigm effect, which was like a cultural conditioning or a cognitive filter, for lack of a better term. You only see what the paradigm wants you to see. And I like the term of a landscape fabric for those who are gardeners. It only lets certain things through, and other things it blocks out. And I think our paradigms and our worldviews act in the same way. In the past 2 decades, and more recently in the news, it's been hurricanes and floods, pretty major environmental disasters. Lots have been around pollution, around species extinction. All of those things are now common stuff in the news, as are carbon taxes, alternative energy, those positive things in response to climate change. And I think that has stimulated a lot of writing and social work in those areas. And I would vouch that since I retired 5 years ago, there's more been written about environment and social work than in the previous 25 years. I think there's a few studies that would probably bear me out. It's just ballooning in terms of an interest in interventions and what social work's role might be, those kind of things. However, social work's role in environmental issues is still peripheral. It's not part of the core curriculum of many schools. And I don't think we're key players in any kind of movement to deal with climate change, or how can we transition to a carbon-free society. So the question is why? And I said one of the reasons why is that many social workers are employed in mandated agencies. They do child welfare, they do senior care, they're working in corrections. They're working for government agencies who really don't like to change at best, or are slow to change. Okay? And sometimes interest in environmental issues is actually discouraged. We've had a prime minister who actively discouraged attention to the physical environment. We have one in the States right now who denies that climate change exists. So when you're those kind of political realities, it's hard to put your job on the line if you're a practitioner wanting to be attentive to some of these issues. At the same time as that's occurring, there's been a lot of written. I know Dominelli has a book recently in the last 5 years on environmental issues. Mel Gray and I and Tiani have a book on environmental issues. Matthews and Nari in Europe, from England, have a book on environmental issues. There's lots of scholarship dealing with that. At the same time, Matthews and Nari's note, and that's a 2017 publication, discussions of the transition to a carbon-free world, or around an environmentally attentive world, is a novelty position in social work. It's still, she called it a novelty position. And I think most social workers and professionals overall have missed what I think is the most significant impact of the environmental movement on social work. And that, I think, is the exposure of its modernist foundation, and how this acts as a barrier to the transition to much needed theory development. I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, is modernity. Most people have a sense of it, but give it just it's a worldview, it's a paradigm. Just a couple comments. Worldviews or paradigms are the way a person perceives his or her understanding of the world, their place in it, the social world, the physical world. It's a sense of that. Most of us absorb this in socialization, education, and for most of us, it's unconscious. We don't know it, but we act that way and assume other people act that way. And part of higher education is to learn to begin to identify what are those core values. One of my questions I started to ask students later on in my teaching was, where did that question come from? And the challenge is, where in your values and beliefs might that question, as legitimate as it is, what informs that? And modernity was in vogue. Hugh talked this morning about the early days of social work. And Stephen Webb has done a study around the evolution of social work. And he talks about Webb capably illustrates how the ideas and discourses of secular modernity had significant impact on the emergence and development of social work. And he made reference also to Mary Richmond's scientific philanthropy, which really represented that positivist kind of thinking in social work at the time. Webb contends that certain key ideas emerged from this period and still form the background horizons of our moral, scientific, and practical experiences of social work. So he's talking about those modernist foundational assumptions which inform social work. They inform all professions, actually, but they had particular impact on social work because we emerged at that time frame. And issues like regulation and self-improvement, that tension that exists, and you mentioned that this morning, it's all part of that modernist, it's in there. It's in the trend to keep order and maintain stability, yet we want to help people get along and improve their lives. So we've had a lot of good things that happened under modernity. We've got television sets, and computers, and vaccines, and marvelous health operations of some kind, and many of us my age now are living much longer because of the advantages of modernity. There's a lot of good things here. And I'm not proposing that we get rid of modernity, but I think we need to understand it and put modernity under a different set of values. And I want to be clear, it's not, what I'm going to talk about today is not an either or. It's not modernity or something else, but it's like the spiral of development of knowledge, that modernity is here and we know more now, so we have to bring another set of knowledges and values to inform modernity and to put it in its place, so to speak. Okay, so let's put one more here. Okay. I'm skipping what I've written, but I think it's probably better to do that than be tedious. We talk about climate change. We've talked about, with all it involves, whatever that is, global warming, rising sea levels, increasing droughts and floods, fires, which BC was full of, more frequent valley and storms, spread of tropical diseases, air pollution. Those are all the consequences of that technological, positivist, scientific change in modernity. The idea is that it is science that has led us to understand these negative results. So modernity has, in a sense, exposed some of its own pitfalls by scientific methods. And there's a fellow named Christopher writes, modern capitalism, industrial technology, individualistic morality, mechanistic science, all characteristics of modernity, result in all of those other things. They are not miscalculation. They're not accidents. They are part and parcel of this belief system that governs Western society and through them the rest of the world. In one of my earlier publications I wrote, the environmental crisis is not just having an impact on our lives. It is our way of life. It is the advancement of industrial enterprise through the consumption of nature and the exploitation of people. Those sound familiar. I think Hugh talked a bit about those this morning. I think Cindy made reference to some of the same kind of characteristics. There is a bit of a complementarity here. Most of those things govern our lives. It is homo economicus, because it is mostly men who control these economic arms of the world. It puts a priority on money. It makes a priority on profit. That's what the whole economic thing is. Economic well-being is primary. So other social well-being is secondary to being economic. There was a lot of time when people were expected to move where the jobs are. It doesn't matter that your 10 generations of your family live in this town. Go. The jobs are, and Newfoundland knows that. Most lot of young people in Fredericton know that. There's a whole network of my son's children, my friends and children in Calgary, because they all moved west to get jobs. And that's it. That's the whole notion of the dominance of economism. And the other one is a healthy economy is a growing economy. If you hear the news around growth, everything's got to be growth. The GDP's got to grow. It's got to grow. It's got to get bigger. Otherwise, it's going to go to hell. Thomas Berry refers to our economy as an extractive economy. And I think that's really important, because we're extracting and converting those materials through industrialization into material goods, which we then consume and discard. And that's the primacy. What's the next one? Progress. Well, obviously progress is growth. Okay? And we're going to produce lots of goods and services, and out of that abundance, people will be better off. But and progress is identified as economic growth. Consumerism. Most of us are familiar with that. Material goods are the source of happiness. I remember many of my students having a weekend off. They're going to drive down to Kittery or some places in the States for retail therapy. But it's all consumption and consuming. I remember Christmases when my kids were preschoolers, and it was a while ago now, but we would get together with our families, my wife's sisters and brothers and my own, and have Christmases, and there wasn't any economic downtime. You could hardly have to get around the presents. You were like this, because you put half a dozen kids in the room and probably twice that many adults. It was hard to realize there were economic hardships going on. But it was all consumerism, and that was the source of happiness. Industrialism has got to do with the production of abundance. And courtesy of Henry Ford, we have this mass production system that's everywhere now. And the purpose is abundance. And through that abundance, more people are going to have access to these goods and services, so more people will be happy. Attached to progress, if I go back and say, it's also a belief that technology will solve our problems. That all we have to do is use science and use technology, and they'll make all our problems go away. Competition, that's pretty straightforward. I got individualism there, is that the rights of the individual are more important than the rights of community. And I get that into a place where it's a zero-sum type of proposition, or a win-lose proposition, where many people are after things because if I don't get it, somebody else will, and it's better if I get it. And so many things in our life are around competition, not based on need, it's not based on equity or fair distribution. It's competition. It's a winner-take-all kind of mentality. All you have to do is watch sports and you'll be into that. Anthropocentrism, I mentioned, the human centeredness, and the values of humans having a priority over other things. The challenge within this model is that that nature and many humans have instrumental value towards economic progress. And things like consumerism, progress, industrialism, individualism come into themselves. And I think the challenge is there's a deeper set of values that even inform these that often get overlooked. And I think if you look at Dominelli's book on environmental social, she's quite critical of our economic system, of capitalism and the industrial enterprise, and quite appropriately so. But I think we got to go one step deeper than that, okay, and look at some of the even more deeper fundamental values and beliefs. And most often people don't go this far. Because at the bottom, at the top, is dualism. Humanity is separate from God, however we understand that. Okay? And nature. People are separate from nature. We believe that. I remember my catechism in grade 1. There was this great chain of being. I don't know, some people remember that. There was God on top, then the angels. This is the Catholic tradition, by the way. There'd be God, the angels, and saints up top. Then there'd be men and women, and then there'd be children, and then animals. And that's the order of the universe. That's built in. We were taught that in grade 1 and grade 2. And that's the notion of we're separate and subservient to those above us. Which opens up to the next one is domination, because there's a notion that humans are best. We're made in the image and likeness of God. Again, sorry, that's my Catholic background coming out there. But that was taught, and many still believe it. Okay? So we're superior to the rest of nature. Okay? And nature's abundant. Nature's out there to serve us. And so domination becomes part of that. A lot of feminist scholars have written about how the domination of nature is similar to the domination of women that's experienced in our culture. And I think this notion of domination applies to lesser humans. So I don't like using that term, but in our culture and in history, there have been humans who have been considered lesser. So a history of racism. Women are still not given equal status in our culture. And I think that's got to do because these issues of dualism and domination are still rampant and underlying our culture of modernity. And what's the last one? Determinism. This is the mechanistic view of your Earth. Earth is parts. It's the biological clock type mechanism that often defines nature. Quantum physics has shot that down, but it's still very much part of our thinking. And I'm on the Federal Foundation Grants Committee, and they're looking for outcome measurements. They're looking for outcome measurements of everything you do. And that's the part here, is outcome measurements, evidence-based practice, all the onus on that comes from this particular group, if you want, in our paradigm or worldview. Rationalism and science are the best ways of knowing. And so other ways of knowing are secondary and not even considered. So Cynthia talked this morning around indigenous knowledges. From a modernity point of view, they're not considered. In my notes I have, they are underappreciated, isolated, and excluded. And I think that's certainly the case. A fellow named Einstein wrote once that you cannot solve a problem with the same logic that created it. And so to solve these problems, we have to move to another way of thinking. And that's where we have to look to alternative worldviews, what Escobar has called transitional discourses. And there's been a number put out that have tried to come out in response to a notion of modernity. And I do like the notion of transitional discourse because it implies a transition. And again, it's not either or, it is a transitioning to a new way of thinking. And it requires a conceptual break with modernist origins of social work self-understanding and reconceptualization of professional practice in increasingly chaotic society. But that we do have to look at that and reframe and reconceptualize social work. There are many transitional discourses. Al Gore, I saw his second Inconvenient Truth documentary the other night. It just reaffirms what his first one said. But he talked about the more deeply I search for the roots of the global environmental crisis, the more I'm convinced that it is an outer manifestation of an inner crisis. It is, for lack of a better word, spiritual. And that word comes up in many people who have talked about that transition. mutuality, integrative tendency, interdependence and holism, sacred balance, sacred ecologies. Indigenous worldviews have often regarded the earth as sacred. That's part of many of the indigenous worldviews. And Michael Hart, in one of his publications, has talked about the good life, which really is, I really quite like that analogy, because the characteristics that go into what makes a good life. And holism and some of those issues come quite into that. And spirituality is quite at the core of that existence. Escobar calls it living well. And other things are taking priority over economics and deciding economic and social policies. They've also been, core assumptions of modernist foundation have been critiqued almost by feminist scholars who argue that the deeply buried assumptions of positivism, dualism, hierarchy can lead to the inappropriate understanding and application of intervention. Spretnak, Plumwood, Saley have all argued about that. And so it's, let's move on, I'm going to keep my finger here. An ecosocial worldview, everything is one. We're all together. We're all connected. A lot of people talk about interdependence, connectedness. That's at the core of an alternative or a lot of transitional foundation worldviews. So, I've called this an ecosocial worldview, but I would much prefer to call it eco-spiritual, which I did in one article, but I think ecosocial might have a little more take-up and less initial resistance. The universe as a whole. Everything is one and we're all connected. Brian Swoon, who's a physicist, talks about, as an expression in one of his videos, hydrogen if given enough time becomes people. We're all connected. We all emerged from this primordial soup that existed on this planet a few billion years ago. And all the life that has come out has emerged from that same core. People talk about different parts of our mind that have evolved over different times in the evolution of animals. The other one is interiority. It's has a notion of intrinsic value, that all species, every member of every species has value, not just in their own life, but a value in the sense of a contributing to the whole. And that's a pretty big one to assume. It's quite a different assumption around people and things and animals having instrumental value to us. Complexity. If we look at evolution and the evolution of the Earth, and there's a nice book out that Swin and Barry wrote called The Universe Story, and it talks about from the Big Bang and since that time. And the Earth has become more diverse and more complex. And if we look at that as an evolutionary path, we can expect that our planet, our universe, humanity, over time is going to become more diverse and more complex. We have to expect that. Modernity doesn't like diversity. Modernity likes everything the same. Organizations don't like diversity because it makes it more difficult to deal with problems. And anybody who's worked in a bureaucracy knows that diversity is not nice. Yes, there are a lot of good things to say about bureaucracy. You can specialize, you can be very good at certain things, but if you don't fit that certain thing, it's a challenge. And so what this model is saying, that diversity and difference is all good. And we need to celebrate those things. Boundaries, and there's limits to what we can do. There are limits to the regenerative capacities of the planet. There's only so much we can do before the system starts to break down. And we can see that on the planet today with with the pollution, with overfishing, okay, with the lands that have been polluted and aren't going back, with forests that have been cut down and can't regenerate for whatever reasons. So there's a lot of that happening. And there are boundaries, and we need to respect them. Humans cannot do whatever they used to do, whatever they want to do most correctly. And so what it says is that human laws must be subject to other things. And that is, in my mind, a spirituality. Because if you're not the boss, if you can't decide whatever you want, if you are responsible to and responsible for other things, then your meaning and your value in life has got to come from relationships and not from just a more self-centered point of view. And that's implied in here. So here are some of the characteristics. I talked about interdependence, the rights of nature. I think Ecuador, a couple of years back, in their constitution, gave rights to nature, the right to exist. Respectful individualism, that's Hart's word, and I like that because it implies a responsibility that goes along with human growth and development. So as we become more self-fulfilled, we also have a responsibility to others, to the planet, to our community, and that's part of being an individual. That's part of maturing and growing, and part of self-fulfillment is that little bit of responsibility. And that's why I kind of like that term there. And Earth is on an irreversible path of creativity and differentiation. Okay. And so are we as a species. We are on an evolutionary path. Ken Wilber has written about this. Lloyd DeMaz has written about it. Okay. We're not just dependent on genes anymore. Our evolution is as much dependent on our means, our knowledges that become around the world, as it is our genes. And Lloyd DeMaz uses as a measure of that how we treat children. Okay. We treat children very differently today than we did 200 years ago. In fact, there's been books written that childhood was invented in the late 1800s, okay, when children started to go to school, as opposed to work. We didn't have, so, and in terms of child welfare, there was animal cruelty laws much before there was laws about child abuse. So how we treat children is, by Lloyd DeMaz's point of view, an indicator of how humanity has progressed, and is progressing to higher levels of functioning. And I think we humans as a species need to think of ourselves transitioning and growing to higher levels of human function. And I don't think I never really studied that in school, never really looked at it. We talked about human growth and development and Maslow and those kind of things. Sustainability, biological limits. And well-being is an important one, because well-being is redefined as maintaining healthy living conditions for all species. That's a different definition of progress, well-being, success, than how much money you're making, having a job, gross domestic product. So when our social policies then are taking place by promoting well-being as their objective. And that's, I think, a big step, a different step. I got 1 minute left, okay. Implications, sorry. Humans are co-creators. Humanity is having such an impact on the planet that the things we do, okay, are impacting the evolution of the planet. How we respond to this climate crisis that's happening today, what we do is going to impact where the planet is 200, 500, 1,000 years ago from now. So we are co-creators. That's a big responsibility for our species to undertake, but that's what it means. We are evolving as a species. I talked about that. Well-being is symbiotic. My well-being is dependent on your well-being. And I cannot be the best I can be, the most fulfilled as a human being, unless each of you has the same opportunity. Unless the plants and animals outside our environment have those same opportunities. So we want to thrive. People, plants, and animals also have to be able to thrive. And so we've got to find a way where we can nurture that well-being, okay, without doing harm to the environment. And that's a real social and economic challenge that we face. Decision making is holistic. I think that makes sense since we have to consider all of those different realities and not just our own. And well-being is multidimensional. I'm going to jump a little bit here. I just came across these folks, I can't pronounce their last name, sorry. Perfect. They wrote an article and they redefined well-being, and they said instead of having gross domestic product and how much money you make and different things like that as the definition of success, we should start using having, doing, loving, and being as measures and as goals for our social policies. So having is often Maslow's lower basic need level, for making sure everybody has those needs met. Doing is the opportunity for intentionality and thoughtfully reflect on your own actions, and not everybody can do that. Because if you're poor or desperate or marginalized and your other needs, that's not possible for most. Loving the quality of relations with other people and the rest of nature. So these are all things, and then being, the opportunity to integrate and contribute to society, to live in harmony with nature, and work on personal growth. So those are an understanding of well-being, that if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, you can fit them in, or if you look at Michael Hart's conditions, 7 conditions of the good life, they fit nicely into those more. And I have to stop, but those are some of the applications of some of those. If you read Verlami and Helmy, they come to the top 3. The next ones are things that are direct social applications of some of those policies. Eliminating poverty and exclusion, promoting social benefits. You can read. I'll let you do that. I'm a little bit over, but I'll stop.